Some soldiers of a broken world, with tattered banners let your rage unfurl. Stand against tyranny that's deep and old. Power to the people, hearts burning bold. False promises and corrupt schemes rip the veil off the deadly dreams. No more silence, no more deceit. We'll take back the ground beneath our feet. Oligarchs with their greedy hands tight. Central banks fueling our nights light. New world order creeping in disguise. We see through a facade and all their lies. Burn all their lies. Break right through. Break right through. Eyes up, soldiers of a broken world. With tattered banners, let your rage unfurl. Stand against tyranny that's deep and old. Power to the people, hearts burning bold. False promises and corrupt schemes rip the veil off the deadly dreams. No more silence, no more deceit. We'll take back the ground beneath our feet.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Why is that over there like that? Interesting. I'll figure that out in a minute. So I decided to kind of do this stream on the fly. Didn't really plan on doing one today, but still going to do one this weekend. Of course, we still have our Juris Society meeting on Sundays as usual. But I just decided to make this because I came across some interesting documents that I wanted to share with everyone pertaining to how it is we are right on the cusp of a worldwide digital dictatorship, essentially, where AI is going to be our overlords, and just how far away from the original intention of this republic and also of God himself that we are, as far as society and the building of society is concerned. So it looks like I already have Mojo. This is an open panel. If anyone wants to come up and engage in the conversation, stay on topic, I would appreciate that. But the link is pinned in the description, or not description, pinned in the comments on both sides, Rumble and YouTube. So without further ado, let me bring up Mojo real quick. How you doing, Mojo?
Doing okay. Good evening.
Yeah.
Hope all is well with you.
I suppose it is evening, isn't it? Let me try to fix this. No, that's not it. That's not it. Weird. There we go. That'll work. All right. Let's see what we have in the chat. We have Corbett, Winbay Bear, Mojo. You're up here with me, obviously. Make stupid people famous. Good to see you. We got Carol with a K, International Truth Expo, which will be taking place November 7th, 8th, and 9th in Quartzsite, Arizona. I will be presenting, among others. I will, because I did the stream on the fly, I didn't put the description or the links in the description, but I will after the video. They're also in the description of prior streams to this. So go ahead and check out the International Truth Expo website. Get some information on that. There's going to be camping, live music, and of course, a ton of truth. So I hope to see many of you there. Let's see here. We got Flat Earth. Eric Daly is with us as well. So good to see you guys. All right. So last night I was watching my dad's stream, Sovereign Soul Unchained Mind, and he played this video. All right. He played this video. And it was talking about how the Carnegie Rockefeller institutes. Carnegie took over the control of international education. Rockefeller took over the control of domestic education here in the United States. And the purpose was quite literally to make you forget who you are, right? So the purpose of this stream is to demonstrate a couple of things. First and foremost, that there is only one law. And this law had remained unchanged from all the way back to when the Magna Carta was created to the Northwest Ordinance here in the late 1700s. And I have that to demonstrate here in a little bit. But that law is essentially do not violate anyone else's free will and honor your compacts, honor your word, honor your agreement. Hence the last stream I did about building artificial structures based on compact and trust relationships is essentially what societies and governments are, right? But as we read in Cruden v. Neal, man in a state of nature is independent of all institutions of his fellow men absent consent. And that's important. So what is the law? Okay, well, the law is essentially do not violate the free will of others. And you can pretty much sum the entire thing up in the 11th commandment. So how do we end up with different forms of law outside of just that simple common law? And it all boils down to your relationship to your own estate. Now, what is an estate? And I have to go through this stuff, even though I beat a dead horse, just in case someone's new. But in your estate, everyone has an estate. From the wealthiest person in Manhattan to the bum on the side of the road collecting change, everyone has an estate. Your estate is your personality, your labor, and your property. Property is the ultimate realization of your free will. And you acquire something by will to serve your will. Therefore, the law treats property as an extension of your will. And this is the entirety of law, is dealing with property, the descent of property, and the alienation of property, which means to buy, sell, trade property, to dispose of property. That's it. That's all law has anything to do with. So you end up in other forms of law. And to begin this stream, we're going to go back to William the Conqueror in 1066. I know history's boring, but that's actually the point of the stream. The education system has brainwashed you into hating the act of learning, right? And if you do not know this stuff, you'll never, ever, ever, will never have a chance at stopping this digital dictatorship that is coming. So we got El Perro showed up. Good to see you, man. So go back to William the Conqueror. Prior to William the Conqueror in 1066, nobles had a lodial title in England. Well, I don't even know if you'd call them nobles. Just freeholders had a lodial title to their land. Okay. And the law was not written down. It was considered an abomination to write the law down because it gave man the opportunity to lie. Law is quite simple. Do not violate anyone else's free will. Do not steal their property. Do not harm them or their property. And everything that goes with violating someone's free will. That was the law. It didn't need to be written down. The only portion of the law that ended up needing to be written down was the descent of property under feudalism. So how did feudalism happen? Well, all men had a lodial title, absolute claim. The king could not tell these men what to do with their lands, on their lands. Okay, the king regulated commerce and acted as a front man in international trade and diplomatic relations. That was the only purpose of a king. Okay, and he controlled, say, the city, like the city where his kingdom was. Like if you had a bunch of town shops and all that stuff, he regulated the commerce, created a form of money to facilitate society, those types of things, but he could not tell you what to do with your property. William the Conqueror came over, conquered England. Once he conquered England, he took away their military law and let them keep their common law. And then, I believe, staged an invasion, but either way, whether he staged or not, Denmark came and invaded. Since they had no military law, they got their asses kicked, right? And then that allowed William the Conqueror to come back and say, hey, why don't you adopt this military style of law called feudalism? Well, I don't know if they called it feudalism at that time, but it's what it is. He said, basically, everyone gives their land to the king. And then the king will re-gift it back out under specific conditions that create something outside of law. Okay, and the only way the king was able to create something outside of law was by taking sole ownership of all of the property, all of the lands, titling them and then gifting them back out to the people who gave them to them in the first place. This was done through a process called registration. So when you look at feudal law is not actually law, it is the regulation of trust arrangements and the use of property that does not belong to the person using it. That is the only way you can create something outside of law, is by regulating the use of property that someone is using but does not belong to them. And the administrator, has a superior claim to the property. So then they can determine the use of that property. That's where the jurisdiction of equity came from. Okay. So with that brief description, I want to show you, and I don't think I've shown the jurists this, Mojo, so you might be interested to see this. This is going to be the original Wisconsin Constitution from 1848. One of the best ones, in my opinion. So right here, you read in and the reason a lot of this stuff that I'm going to show you, you've never seen or heard, and these concepts are foreign to you, is because of the control of the education system, which I will get into. We're going to watch that video that my dad showed on his channel last night. And I actually hunted down the document they were talking about. So all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, not privileges and immunities granted by a corporation, inherent rights endowed upon you by God, right? Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, the one thing you're going to notice when you're reading actual law is it always only concerns the use and descent of property. Right? The ownership, use, and descent of property. That is the sum total of law. Okay, so this is where they say there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. You got your freedom of speech, right to assemble, trial by jury. Right? Now, this is interesting. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to be heard by himself and counsel. To demand the nature and cause of the accusation against him, to meet the witnesses face to face and have compulsory process to compel the attendance of witnesses on his behalf, and in prosecutions by indictment or information to a speedy public trial, right? So no person shall be held to answer for a criminal offense unless on the presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases of impeachment or cases cognizable by justices of the peace, or arising in the Army and Navy, or in the militia. So the reason that I'm bringing this stuff up is, so like El Piro says, you're using the person created by the state. He's kind of getting ahead of me, though. So yeah, we'll get to that, El Piro. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because how would this take place? How would this apply in a traffic case, right? You're speeding, or any kind of traffic ticket is considered technically criminal. That's what they'll tell you. But who is your accuser? Who is your victim? Where are the witnesses to this crime? None of this actually applies, because what you're being brought forth to answer for is the improper use of property under administration. Since you don't have sole ownership of your property, your car, right? And you've registered it, which means given it to the state, then it is now under administration, and the state decides how that property is used by you as what's called a usufruct. And that is the foundation of administrative law, which is not law. Again, this is the only way you can get outside of law is regulating the use of property or having administration of someone's estate. Say if they're an infant or a minor, or they're incompetent or incapacitated in some way. Then you're under the control of someone who's presumed to have a free will. And I really want to drive this home. So this is the actual reason though I brought this up. So who here, Mojo, what does allodial mean?
Basically, you have free and clear title and you are the owner.
Yep. Nobody has an interest in that land. No superior interest exists in whatever it is that you have allodial title of. And when you have allodial title of something, nobody can determine how that property is used but you, because no one else has an interest in it. When more than one person has interest in the same property, it's called privity, and that's what gives birth to privilege. Your privileges are not absolute rights regarding something. Privileges are your equitable interest in that property, what you have the right to do concerning that property with respect to someone else who has interest in that property. And that's where the jurisdiction of equity comes from. You only have an equitable right in that property. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular part because we got a lot to get to, but all lands within the state are declared to be allodial, and feudal tenures are prohibited. Now, what is feudalism? It's where essentially one centralized authority, such as the government or the crown, has complete controlling interest over all property, right? And thereby can determine how that property is used. That's feudalism, right? So feudal tenures are prohibited. That's extremely important. That means that this is 100% proof, without a doubt, that all lands within the United States, the several states of this union, Confederate Union, are allodial. So property taxes should never exist. There should be no such thing as property taxes at all, right? Because when you own something, you own it. You shouldn't have to continue to pay for it after you own it. A lot of people wonder, why do I own this but still have to pay to own it? Because you don't own it, right? You're just a usufruct of that. You have a usufructory right to that, or an equitable right to that property, meaning you can use it for the benefit of another person. So this is hugely important. This shows you that all lands, because it's not like just Wisconsin would be allodial and nowhere else, right? Because of the doctrine of equal footing, the equal footing doctrine, all lands are declared to be allodial. That is hugely important, okay, for what we're going to go through. Another thing that you've probably never heard of or learned because of the control of the education system is, let me see. This is from 1820. This is laws concerning the territory of Michigan. The said territory and the states which may be formed therein shall forever remain a part of this confederacy. Do you guys see that? Here, let me zoom in case you can't. Okay, so right here. See where I'm moving this? Right at the top. The said territory and the states which may be formed therein shall forever remain a part of this confederacy of the United States of America, subject to the Articles of Confederation. This is Michigan. So see how school is brainwashed and programmed you immediately. Well, Michigan's not a Confederate state, and aren't Confederates racist? And then they, you know what I mean? No, the Confederacy is the type of union. Okay, so in a confederacy, the sovereignty resides within the state, and it retains all powers which it does not expressly give to some other body which it created and is subject to, and that creation is subject to it anyways. So in 1871, after the Civil War, they created a corporation which then territorially occupied all the states and changed the union from a Confederate union, where the sovereignty resides within the state, to a corporate union. And the very linchpin of this entire scam, this entire scheme, is the 14th Amendment. All right, so without further ado, let's get into this video that I wanted to show you guys, that I seen on my dad's show, and the purpose of me deciding to do this stream today. I bookmarked it. All right, I'm going to have to represent the screen because StreamYard doesn't have volume when you share the window for whatever reason. Okay. So, bookmark.
Brainwashing. Okay, you're saying these people that are experts in brainwashing is using the Department of Education to brainwash our children.
Yes.
What are they after? Why are they doing it?
Well, if you want to move a country from a free individualistic economy,
which we have.
yes, or had,
okay,
to a planned economy, you have to do it through the schools. You have to dumb down and brainwash, change the attitudes and values. You have to completely, social engineering has to go on constantly, and many teachers know what I'm talking about. And people are going to say, well, when did this start? And who on earth ever did this? Why would a plan like that be allowed to be carried out?
That's right.
Well, then you have to go back to 1934, which I will do, and we have to go to the three-pronged fork, okay? So I do think that the watershed year, although you can go back to the early part of the century when the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation were deeply involved in education, and that it was decided then that Carnegie would deal with the international part and Rockefeller domestic. But then we moved on to 1934, and this was after World War I. And there were these educators were, many of them, going back and forth to Russia, very admiring of the new system in Russia, communistic system. And they wanted to put it in here in the United States. And so the Carnegie Corporation, that had always been involved in, trying to get us into world government after the League of Nations and all in 1917, they still had this goal. And of course, world government will be communism. I mean, it's really international socialism. That's what Lenin.
And what communism is perfected feudalism. It's worldwide feudalism. If you have worldwide communism, you have worldwide feudalism, because communism is the abolition of private property rights, making all property public and under the administration of the government. See, when one has absolute title to your property, a allodial title, like we just read in the Wisconsin Constitution, then nobody can determine how that property is used. Nobody can tell you can't build a deck on it, right? Or you have to go get a permit to build a deck on it. Nobody can charge you property taxes, because property taxes are a feudal fee. That's what that is. That's, you're a tenant on that land and you're paying for the right to continue to use that land. And because you do not have absolute title of that land is under administration, and the administrator determines how that land's used. And that's what Rockefeller, Carnegie, all these guys are part of these wealthy robber barons. Even Michigan was founded by a bunch of them, where they got together and created municipal corporations and created various other corporate forms of corporation and trust, which corporation is a form of trust, and then consolidated their resources and their ownership, made themselves, say, an incorporated board of trustees, and then allowed people to come in and live on their land. And they acted as feudal lords, creating statutes, ordinances, and codes regarding the use of that land. Like, oh, you can only drive this fast here, and you can, or not drive, but say you can only have a buggy here on this lane, and you can't make noise. It's a public ordinance violation. You can't, drink on Sundays. And this is that. And the only way they can do stuff like that is if you don't have absolute title to the property you're using. That's the only way property can be regulated. And the only way you get outside of actual law, which there is only one law, it's the original jurisdiction. Every other form of government and what they call law stems from common law. It's the original jurisdiction. It is the only law. Everything else is only called law as it's a misnomer to call it law. It's just the easiest way to describe it. Like when you say administrative law, it's not actually law. It's the regulation of the use of property under administration, right? So now listen to this.
So they've always wanted this. And
the Department of Education today is going along with that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And so in 1934, the Carnegie Corporation produced, it took 4 years, they commissioned the American Historical Association to put together a study of the social studies. And they came up with lots of volumes, but I have one little volume, Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies. And basically that little one, it's an original book. I wish I'd brought it with me. Too bad, but I don't even dare let it out of the house. It's so important. It called for changing the United States through the schools, from a free individualistic economy to a socialist, collectivized, planned economy in the New World Order.
It says that in the book?
Yes.
Yes, it
That book was
does.
written when?
In 1934.
By who?
It was the Carnegie Corporation paid for it. The American Historical Association put it together. And
can people get that book in the library?
No.
No.
So she says no. So when I seen this on my dad's show last night, I was like, you know what? I bet you I can find that book. And you know what, guys? I did. And it is right here. So that's pretty much what I wanted to lead into this. Now, when we read this document, this is insidious, but it also gave me the opportunity to explain this is not only the reason why they changed or why they took control of the education system, but it's also why they created NASA, why they created the medical industry and every other system of pseudoscience, which is actually scientism that just expects you to trust the science without actually any empirical evidence, by creating titles of authority. right? And then making the people intellectually lazy so that they just trust the titles of authority. I mean, it's multifaceted, right? It's multifaceted. But here, let's go ahead and take a look at this document, because this is pretty crazy stuff right here. So the document she's referencing is this: the American Historical Association Investigation of the Social Studies in Schools, right? And it wasn't easy to find, but yeah, I found it. So 1934, like she says. So we can go through the preface, chapter 1, right? So actually, I want to just, because a lot of this is very, very heady. So, all right, now we'll start at the top. The social sciences, more than any other division of school curriculum, are concerned immediately with the life, the institutions, the thought, the aspirations, and the far-reaching policies of the nation in its world setting, right? Well, this first part's basically just them explaining why it's so important. Let's go down here. Frame of reference. Intrinsic nature. Hold on. Bear with me, guys. Okay, so right here, the scientific method is invaluable, not only as an indispensable instrument of inquiry, thought, and invention, but as an equally indispensable means of development in students and in society at large. The critical spirit and judicial sense in accordance with which individuals learn to seek and weigh evidence, to compare and contrast, and to act with an informed rather than prejudiced mind. Recognizing the scientific method and scholarly ideals when applied to human affairs are likely to run counter to the notions of the ignorant and the vested interests of groups, right? So what he's talking about is they need to take control of the critical thinking institution, the institutions that apply critical thinking, such as science and the scientific method. Take control of that, because teaching people to think critically, not with a prejudiced mind, but with an informed mind, runs contrary to the vested interests of groups, meaning like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institute, right? They'll never be able, and the reason being is because they need to change your concept of history. They need to change your concept of science and space, your physical reality, so that you have no idea who you are, what you are, or where you are. See, if you knew that we're all created in the image of God, right, and that we all have unalienable rights endowed upon us by our Creator, and that the only way that you can become subject to another man is either by becoming dependent on that man or by contract and agreement, right? If you learn that, then you would be uncontrollable. They wouldn't be able to acquire the administrative control of your property and then cause the nation to become a collectivist and interdependent web of basically corporate tax plantation. That's what it is, corporate tax fields, right? And this is what they were going after. So, let's see here. In light of its assumptions about the nature and function of the social sciences, the value of, hold up, let me bring my dad up here real quick. What's going on?
What's up?
Not a whole lot, man. When I was watching your show last night, it gave me, or I was like, that lady, I showed that video just a little bit ago about this document. She's like, you can't find it in the library. I'm like, I bet I'll find it. And
yeah.
Her sure as hell did. And man, when you read how insidious this actually is, it talks about, there's one part, I think it's page 17. Let me see if it's 17 actually. So I'm trying to get to
good to see you, brother.
What's up, Mojo?
Meat
Doing
of
all
this
right, my
stuff.
friend.
Okay, so under the molding influence, this is 16, under the molding influence of socialized processes of living, drives in technology and science, pressures of changing thought and policy, and disrupting impacts of economic disaster, there is a notable waning in the choice of widespread popular faith in economic individualism. What is economic individualism? That means I'm independent, I'm self-sufficient, right? And I don't need society or government to take care of myself. This is what they wanted to destroy. They had to destroy it, right? And it says, supported by a growing mass of the population, are demanding the introduction into economy of ever wider measures of planning and control, right? So there's one part where they talk about the disappearance of free land, right? So free land is disappearing, is basically what they say, because this is post bankruptcy, 1934. So freeholds are disappearing, which is causing all land to come under administration, which is allowing them to create a collectivist ownership of property by the state instead of the individual. So right here they go ahead and they say, as to the specific form which this collectivism, this integration and interdependence is taking and will take in the future, the evidence at hand is by no means clear or unequivocal. It may involve the limiting or supplanting of private property by public property, which is exactly what's happened, or it may entail the preservation of private property extended and distributed among the masses. Most likely it will issue from a process of experimentation and will represent a composite of historic doctrines and social conceptions yet to appear. Almost certainly it will involve a larger measure of compulsory as well as voluntary cooperation of the citizens in the conduct of the complex national economy, a corresponding enlargement of the functions of government, and an increasing state intervention in the fundamental branches of economy previous left to individual discretion and initiative, right? So a state intervention that in some cases may be direct and mandatory, and in others indirect and facilitative. In any event, the commission is convinced by its interpretation of empirical data that the actual integrating economy of the present day is the forerunner of a consciously integrated society in which the individual economic actions and individual property rights will be altered and abridged. They're telling you. They want to create a society where you don't know the way that law works. They want to make you ignorant of money and law, was the primary reason of doing all of this. Even NASA. They want to make you ignorant of money and law so you do not understand what property ownership actually is, which will allow them to take administrative control of all the property, thereby taking you out of common law and putting you under administrative law, which is only adjudicated in equity where the judges got. So what do you think?
It's pretty much spot on, bro. That's what they're doing.
So I listened to you guys yesterday. You're like, and a lot of people say this is the big question, right? What gives a man the right to tell me what to do, right? When did I agree to that, right? That's the big question. Nothing gives them the right unless they are the administrator of your estate, right? And you are presumed to be an infant or some sort of incapacitated person under guardianship and administration, or unless you're in debt. And so what they did to us is a combination of both, right? So right here, I've got this, and I'll show you guys just the point. So common law remains unchanged because it can't be written. It's only written about, right? And you'll notice the Magna Carta starts off about the holding of lands. If any earl or baron holds lands directly of the crown for military service, and at his death, his heir shall be of full age and owe a relief. So the Magna Carta starts out talking about inheritance. This is 1215, right? We go to the Organic Acts of the Territories. This is the Northwest Territory. And as soon as it starts, it says that the estates of both the resident and non-resident proprietors of said territory, dying intestate, shall descend to. Because this is all law has to do with, is who owns and controls property. Because that's the only way you can determine how property is used, right? So the Magna Carta being the origin of Michigan's compiled laws. Where did I pull that up at? Yep, right here. Magna Carta being the origin of Michigan's compiled laws is twofold. The purpose of this is twofold. One, because it opens the door for administration of infant and decedent estates, meaning somebody presumed missing, presumed dead, who does not have a will. It opens the door for the state to administer your estate, all your property and the property rights of any infants or wards that may be part of the estate. Secondly, because in the Magna Carta, they preserve to the merchants the customs of lex mercatoria, which is merchants' law, which is essentially could be called the common law of merchants, international trade, which allows them to bring all of this debt-based bullshit inland, all this inland piracy. And now we're at UCC is basically the codification of Lex Mercatoria, right? So the reason I bring that up is the Organic Acts of the Territories, Commission of the Social States. Where was I going? Oh, yeah, that's why I wanted to do the Avalon. So the Pennsylvania Constitution, this is important. This is 1776, right? This ties into why they wanted to. So with the advent of the industrial age, manufacturing in these big robber baron oligarchies, right, like Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel and all this, created a mass of people that were dependent on a business or corporation for their livelihood, as opposed to a trade or farming or something that keeps them independent, right? So this is important because when we read here, it says, section 36, as every free man to preserve his independence, if without sufficient estate, meaning you can't just survive off the recurring revenue of your estate, ought to have some profession, calling, trade, or farm whereby he may honestly subsist, and there can be no necessity for nor use in establishing offices of profit, right? The usual effects of which are dependence and servility, unbecoming of freemen, and in the possessors and expectants, faction, contention, corruption, and disorder among the people. So what's an office of profit? It's a welfare office.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. So we can look right over here to the creation of, what is it? An act for the relief of the poor, right? So this is 1827, Michigan. It says that the county commissioners in the respective counties of this territory shall have care and management of all paupers in their respective counties. And be it further enacted that when application is made to the said commissioners on behalf of any inhabitant who is suffering condition and unable to support himself, it shall be the duty of said commissioners to examine the truth of such statement, and if upon inquiry they are of opinion that such person ought to be supported at public expense, they shall issue a warrant to the sheriff or county directing him to take charge of and to provide the support for such person, right? And so this goes on to explain the creation of the office of profit, right? And what the administration, so essentially what happens is when you're poor and you accept a benefit, you settle your estate. Okay. And I say this all the time, but settlement is the conveyance of an estate for the benefit of some person or persons. What you're doing is giving the controlling interest of your personality, labor, and property to the state so that they can make it productive and then give your productive value back to you in the form of a benefit. This is exactly what Social Security is. Right. And so this all comes from Settlement Acts and the Poor Relief Acts in England. And the reason they never had to legislate any of that shit here is because when we became independent, we didn't create a new law. We didn't go, oh, well, we're just going to, what kind of law do you guys want? What do you guys think we should live under? No, there was already law because, so Cruden v. Neal right here says that, where is it? Right here. That the majority shall prevail as a rule posterior to the formation of government results from it. It is not a rule binding upon mankind in their natural state. There, every man is independent of all laws except those prescribed by nature. That's common law. He is not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow men without his consent. Period. That's it. Right? So when we became independent, we all became sovereigns again, not bound by any institutions absent consent. And then the institution we did create was a common law institution, right, where government is the servant of the people and merely facilitates trade and provides for the hierarchy for a common defense should we be attacked. That's it. And we stayed above the government. You cannot become under the government because we created it and we enshrined ourselves as the sovereignty. Does that make sense, or do I need to explain it a different way?
That makes sense to me.
So essentially what that means is we created a trust. We're the grantors and the beneficiary of the trust. The way that the United States Corporation circumvented this is they created their own trust, the 14th Amendment citizen. So right here it says that that although he was not a citizen of the United States, he was a citizen and voter of the state under Section 2 of Article 2 of our state constitution. One may be a citizen of the state and yet not a citizen of the United States. And that's so important because what the 14th Amendment citizen is an enfranchisement of a corporation. And you're an agent of the United States. Okay, so the answer to the question, that's why we have the fiduciary foundations of administrative law. How did we come under this situation, right? Is you were state citizens, which means you're one of we the people that have unalienable rights, right? You have absolute property right. We'll read it again if you guys just tune it in. The 1848 Wisconsin Constitution, all lands within the state are declared to be allodial and feudal tenures are prohibited. So for example, my dad inherited my grandfather's property down in Virginia, right? If that land was allodial, then my dad on that land could do whatever the hell he wants to do, period, as long as he didn't hurt or damage anyone else's property or their person, right, or their body. And he would never pay property taxes because that's what a feudal tenure is. So how did we end up in this situation? Well, after the Civil War or at the Civil War, right, the Congress, our original constitutional Congress, adjourned without a day. Everybody knows that, right? Like that's common knowledge for the most part. What they don't realize is that the monster that stayed behind and reconvened as Congress was just the United States, the Union, as a corporation, right, as a company. And the Union states that decided to stand with the Union came under that federal union as essentially a corporate enfranchisement. Okay, it wasn't specifically that at that point, but the whole idea was to create a corporate union as opposed to a Confederate union. And so when the District of Columbia Act of 1871 was passed, the Organic Act, right, there was a corporation, municipal corporation created in the District of Columbia. That municipal corporation then territorially occupied all of the states, the Confederate states, and overlaid those states with a federal jurisdiction like a clear sheet of glass. Okay. Then with the introduction of the 14th Amendment, you created a citizen that is not one of the grantors of the trust, but is a creation of the trust. Okay. So what that means is this United States citizen was an enfranchisement for persons who did not have common law rights under the law because they were property or they were dependent. Again, we know those are the two ways that you come under administration, either your property or you're dependent. And the formerly freed slaves turned out to be both. They were chattel property and they were dependents. They didn't know how to subsist on their own. So what the United States did was created this class of citizen to enfranchise the blacks and the other citizens that came and offer them privileges and immunities in exchange for administrative control of their estates. So they became part of a membership corporation that has certain benefits of being part of that corporation. But as a result of being part of that corporation, you forfeit certain unalienable rights in exchange for privileges and immunities. And that immediately makes you an infant. Title I, Section 8, the word person, being, child, and individual, as including born alive infant. In determining the meaning of any act of Congress or ruling, regulation, or interpretation of the various administrative bureaus, that's the regulation of property, and agencies of the United States, the words person, human being, child, and individual shall include, which is at the exclusion of everything else, every infant member of the species Homo sapien who is born alive at any stage of development, meaning you could be a 50-year-old infant. And when they say shall include, it means only this. And the reason that you're an infant even prior to the bankruptcy is because you are exchanging your for enfranchisement as part of this membership corporation and the privileges, immunities, and benefits that you receive as part of this membership corporation. You're forfeiting your sovereign status to come under this for civil rights instead of your natural rights, right? So now once they had administrative control of the estate, 1933, it says they mortgaged your property rights. They mortgaged your estate. So it's interesting because we have, hold on, before we even get into that. the judge's right to license, to grant license to sell.
Golden Dome, Trump's Golden Dome, the Golden Dawn.
Well, that's the whole thing that's going on now. So they've created this artificial structure, right? And they've granted you a persona, an LEI. That's what the 14th Amendment citizen is this legal entity identification. The word person and persona comes from donning this role. It's like a script has been written for you, and you step into this role and you play this character.
A persona is what's called those masks that they use in theater.
That's what
like when you see the symbol for theater, a tragedy and comedy, you know, the two masks, those are called personas. And our persona, our personality is the mask that we put on when we go into public around other people.
And that's exactly what the 14th Amendment citizen is. Well, so even the state citizenship was that, except for it was a role that you had written as one of the people. The 14th Amendment citizen is a role that the federal corporation has written that you don, and you take on that, you assume that identity. Now, what they're trying to do with the AI, artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence and the integrating of your legal entity identification with your living being is to make it so that you can never extricate yourself from that corporate fiction, and so that you are forever stuck in that persona. You can never be mankind in a state of nature again, because they've infused the corporate fiction as they've made it part of your being. So everywhere you go, AI is only going to recognize that legal fiction. And they put AI governance in charge of everything, because then they can program the AI with the regulation of the use of property, the administrative laws. Yeah, so that's what I was getting to, is this GPO, and then we can talk about it, but I just want to get the basis out of it. So the money will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It represents a mortgage on all the homes and other property of all the people of the nation. Now, so they mortgage your property rights. Well, we have this Fiduciary Foundations of Administrative Laws, a UCLA law review, right? And we go down here to page 121, and it tells you, whoops, is this 120? Yeah, 121. And it tells you that the emerging fiduciary model, meaning one giant trust relationship, because all the property has become public and is being administered, right, in trust, posits that administrative agencies are endowed with authority to set regulatory policy, meaning controlling the way that property is used, when Congress and the president acting jointly as proxy settlers. What is a settler? The conveyance of an estate for the benefit of some person or persons, right? The settlement acts, right? And so they've acted as a proxy settler for the sovereign people. Because you were a 14th Amendment citizen and you came under administration, they were able to mortgage your property rights. They mortgage your property rights. They presume you as the citizen to be missing, presumed dead, right? Missing, presumed dead as the state citizen. Then as a 14th Amendment citizen, you are essentially federal personnel who is managing a decedent estate that is under the administration of the United States Corporation. Does that make sense? Or do I need to break it down a little bit? Mojo, I know you probably understand what I just said, Dad, but.
Yeah, you might want to break it down a little bit for some people. There's El Puro. What's happening, bro?
Hey, thanks for having me up. Appreciate it. And it's coincidental because I actually wanted to say something about that, as you mentioned the military earlier. Okay, now when it comes to that decedent estate and that feudal tendency, it's part of the background history of that feudal tendency that you also owed allegiance to the king in military fashion. And so this is one of the precursors of why we have this draft and the military selective service today. Yep. And it's part of that exact same presumption that you don't have actual authority to the land under the military auspices of a constitution, which is what's giving you your liberties. When you leave the ship, when you leave the vessel, you are at liberty, just like you're at law rather than in law. And so we see this being fomented through, like you said, the public education system, which is a Prussian military style training system. It has
Yes.
nothing to do with education. It trains us to think inside the box that they have constructed and remove the critical thinkers, like you said earlier. When we're thinking about this, 1934, the New Deal and all that, the World War I, do you understand that was a Trading with the Enemy Act, and that's what we're playing today. The New World Order is, in fact, the United States, and that Social Security is an insurance for military personnel. Yep. And you would be surprised to find out that this union of states that we're talking about to form a more perfect union comes from the Universal Postal Union and its constitution, wherein freedom of transit is guaranteed throughout the entire territory of the union, and it is all corporate, meaning it's a labor union.
It's what it exactly. So that's what I was getting to. What they've done is to elaborate on what I was saying about you basically maintaining in a state that's under the administrative control of the United States. It's not presumed to be yours because you, as one of the people, are missing, presumed dead. That's how they look. You're beyond the sea. Okay, you've never came forth and claimed your estate. You've never came forth and rebutted any presumptions of United States citizenship. So what they've done is right here on this, in this congressional record, March 9th, 1933, they mortgaged or settled the estates, like it says right here. As they've acted jointly as proxy settlers. Settler is to convey the estate for the benefit of some person or persons. They settled your estate with the international banking cartel, right? For the benefit of being able to engage in commerce. So because you as one of the people are missing, presumed dead, and then you as an agent of the United States maintaining this estate that's being used as collateral to secure a national debt security scheme, right? That is the only form of commerce at this point in time, that everything that you do as a United States citizen is presumed to be part of a commercial enterprise. So there is no, you know how we have Walmart and we have, Target and we have Bell Tire, we have all these different corporations. Well, there's not actually different corporations. It's all one big corporation. It's all one big fucking corporation. They're all formed under the laws of the United States corporation. They basically exist at the pleasure of this United States corporation, right? And that's why you have to have your social security number to work for these different corporate entities, is because they're essentially corporate tax plantation. They're workhouses. So, and I thought I pulled it up. Maybe I didn't, but there was basically in England, when they were they created through feudalism a huge disparity between the wealthy noblemen, the title holders, and the peasants, and on purpose, so they could create mass amounts of paupers. And once they created mass amounts of paupers, they'd come under parish jurisdiction of the church, and the church would issue them a settlement certificate, which is essentially what your birth certificate is. And make no mistake, the church, the Catholic Church, is the one who backs the public charitable trust now. How do they do that? Huh?
And real quick here, just to insert, the only intent for that settlement certificate was that that decedent, like I said earlier with the military, if the husband went off to war or the brothers went off to war and didn't come back, there is a birth certificate established as a settlement certificate, so that upon death certificate being issued, the estates would be settled. Automatic process.
Exactly. And see, the reason that they've just busted, like, so Doge doing that investigation into the Social Security and people over 120 millions of people over 100 years old collecting Social Securities, because in feudalism, they're what's called a remainder man. So like if I leave something to El Piro, or El Piro leaves something to his kid, right, his son, at his death, and said, I grant you in fee simple the use of this land for the term of your life, right, to be left in remainder to any child you have, then your grandchild would become the remainder man. That's what they do with your Social Security, with that portion of your estate. They say, okay, you use this from 65 or whatever it is for the remainder of your life, and then it's going to be granted in remainder to whoever. Now notice they don't say who. Those checks had to be going somewhere.
Right. And when you look at, and when you look at some of these estate settlements that I've seen, it has specific language in there. It says upon all creditors being made whole, any remainder reverted back to the beneficiary.
If you look, see, that's a
Exactly.
good story. That's a good story to cover for that, Ryan, about the 150-year-old people making Social Security and that. But here's the reality of it. Did you notice that a lot of the age group, the biggest age group of those people that should be dead that are collecting it, are from around the Civil War eras when they were born, right? And if you remember correctly, there was a huge influx of vampires that took place. In fact,
Oh
Abraham
yeah,
Lincoln,
that's right. But
well
Abraham
known
Lincoln,
vampire
yeah,
slayer. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I think. I think that it's vampires that are actually getting the Social Security. And they say, oh, it's just this, no. I've tied it all together. It's vampires, man.
So see, here's the thing though. I like to make it not complicated. It's as much as I can is uncomplicate this for people. Make it simple. And it's this simple. There is only one law. Okay. I'll show you this in two different ways. Not only between the Magna Carta, immediately talking about the heirs and descent of property, because that's this nexus right here of where common law doesn't recognize fictions except only in one instance, the last will and testament of a testator, right? And they'll treat that will and testament as if it is the will of the man who's still living, even though he's dead. Now they've taken this one little nexus and they shoved a pry bar in there, and they're like, okay, well, what if they don't have a will? Now the state gets to step in and alienate and dispose of that property on behalf of the man who died without a will. So they get to act as proxy will in fiction of someone who has existence in fact, or had existence in fact. And then they pull you into this realm of fiction like that, right? So to make this less complicated, there is only one law. Okay. And that law is the common law, which is based on the law of nature, nature's God. And what that is do not violate anyone else's free will. And this is why that you can hardly find anything on Anglo or on Western European law prior to William the Conqueror, because it was not written down. It didn't have to be. It was that simple, right? If the property descends through the blood, okay, right. and you don't violate anyone's will.
Yeah, a man reasonably and logically leaves his inheritance to his eldest son. It's traditionally held through many cultures the exact same way, despite the cultures.
And let's see here. And then there's another place I can show you where this stays preserved. Okay, it stays preserved right here. Look, so this is an excerpt from the settlement certificate or the settlement act of 1662. This is an excerpt from there. If a person entered a parish in which he or she did not have an official settlement, this is in 6062, and seemed likely to become chargeable to the new parish, then an examination would be made by the justices or parish overseers. From this examination on oath, the justices would determine if that person had a means to sustain himself, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is from 1828, Michigan statutes, revised statutes 1828, that if any overseer of the poor of any township shall have reason to believe that any stranger who shall have come to reside in such township and who shall not have obtained a legal settlement therein, same language, same terminology, because it doesn't change. Now, that law is that law. It's summed up like this in a treatise of the law of American Law of Administration, right? Which got to go way down. But he says, my property is that which is mine. I will something to become mine, to serve my will, the same way that my bodily limbs serve my body. And so he says, therefore, law or property is the ultimate realization of one's will. Okay. And that's why property is treated as an extension of an individual's soul. It's pretty much what that boils down to. Now, the only way that you can come out of law into any other form of law, what makes this guy think he has the right to tell me what to do, right? With speed limits and driver's license, insurance, and all that stuff, is when the property comes under administration, either through presumption or by the act of settlement, or your willing act of settlement, which means you either agree to collect a benefit, which by operation of law, you immediately settle your estate with whomever's given you the benefit, or they presume you to be incompetent and you've never stated to the contrary. And what they're doing here is a combination of the two. Okay. So they immediately started sheeting estates under various presumptions. Like in Michigan, these people automatically, if you weren't a freeholder, you were considered a pauper. Okay. So what they did was the wealthy freeholders all got together, created these counties, townships, and all that stuff, and then created corporate entities, making themselves the board of trustees or the overseer commissioners, right? And then everyone who moved onto their collective property, these freeholders all came together and invested and basically made into a corporate entity called a township or whatever municipal corporation. Anyone who decided to move into this area for the purpose of engaging in commerce and sustaining themselves were settled into that area, because they weren't freeholders and they were accepting the benefit of that society or that community in exchange for the sovereign right to their own estate. So Michigan took off right away doing this shit. And then they decided, okay, we're going to make this national by creating a new class of citizen called the 14th Amendment citizen. And that 14th Amendment citizen, so you got to look at it like this, and we have to really read Blackstone right here, Blackstone's commentaries. Man considered as a creature must necessarily be subject to the laws of creator, for he is entirely a dependent being, meaning you are dependent on your creator. So no matter what, the will of the creator is superior to yours. You couldn't exist without the creator. Now he says, a being independent of any other has no rule to pursue but such as he prescribes himself. But a state of dependence will inevitably oblige the inferior to take the will of him on whom he depends as the rule of his conduct. So what does that mean? So as a state citizen, when the state citizens got together and created a state government, they were the grantors of a trust. They were also the beneficiaries, but they were the grantor. They were above the trust. They exist outside the trust. And if they adopted the role of citizen, then they still maintained their superior status, which citizen is a persona, but they still maintain their superior status to that state government because they created the state government and the state citizen. The government didn't create the state citizen. The people did. The people created the state citizen. This is different from the 14th Amendment because in the 14th Amendment is created by the federal corporation and is therefore necessarily indebted to the federal corporation for its sole existence entirely. And then that's why it offers privileges and immunity in exchange for, administrative control of those people. That's how that works. So when you're independent of all other beings, then you are still only subject to common law or law of the creator. But by accepting these privileges and immunities of the 14th Amendment, you became a subclass of basically incapacitated minor who needs privileges and immunities because you can't exercise sovereignty and thereby have access to your common law rights. Did I explain that well, or is that still confusing? No? Yeah?
No, I think you did. Yeah, I think you did fine. And I think it's important for people to understand there's a presumption there, and that is that person belongs to them somehow. No, like it says, it's even a creature of the state. So I explain this by telling people about Samuel Clemens, and he created his own person, Mark Twain. He who creates controls. So it doesn't matter if you want to claim that it's your person or not. The state created that person, not the United States. So even as a state person, they're the ones that created it. They control it. I strongly suggest people learn how to create their own persons. You can create many of them.
Well, that's the trust. That's the private express trust. You create your own legal person and in common law, even though a trust can only ever be adjudicated in equity. Now, why can a trust only ever be adjudicated in equity? And you'll hear people all the time talk about, or at least in our field, El Perro and I, and like vocational science, you'll hear them talk about these are all courts of equity. Well, what's the difference between a court of law and a court of equity? A court of law is where you enforce your actual natural rights. Somebody has violated your free will. They have committed a crime against you. That's what a crime actually is. They've harmed you or your property in some way. Okay. And you enforce that in law because that's dealing with facts. You in fact own this property, and this person in fact did harm you or your property or stole from you, whatever, right? And you're going to redress this grievance in a court of actual law, which is common law, right? Now, when you don't own property and you only have an interest in property, say you have the right to use the property, but somebody else owns it, that's a fictional scenario. And the personas that you must adopt in order to enact that play that was written, that trust is a play, in order, the personas you adopt are fictions. Okay. So trustee is a fiction, right? And you don't have an actual ownership interest in the property. You have an equitable interest in the property, which means you only have a portion of interest and you share that interest with other people. Okay. That's essentially what the United States corporation itself is. And so when you only have an equitable interest in property that's created by a contract, okay, so say and I use this example all the time, say I let my dad use a car, or he lets me use a car in a usufructory capacity. It creates a trust relationship between him and I. So we draw up a contract, right? And now I have the right of use of this car that he ultimately owns. And as part of the contract, he says that I have to pay him 10% of everything I make with the car. And I can only drive the car between 5 a.m. and 7 p.m. And I can only have these types of people in the car, right? Well, none of those things are actually law. But when I enter into this agreement with him, they take on the color of law. But still, that color of law can only be adjudicated in equity because it's not really law and it's not a real situation. It's a fictitious situation created by the two of us that creates private law. So if he tries to say, well, you can't drive, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, but he says I can't leave until 5, right? And so it's after that point in time, and I have the equitable right to drive this car according to our agreement, then I go enforce that equitable right in a court of equity. If you try to take that situation to a court of law, the court of law can't even take recognizance of it, because the court of law is like, where's the law at? What law was broken or created? Wait, there's no law here. This is all the matter of a contract and a trust relationship. And so that's why they made you a usufruct of your own estate, because the other big difference between a court of law and a court of equity is a court of law, especially in this republic, can only be the tribunal authority can only be fellow sovereigns. So when you're trying to convict a sovereign who's above the government, only other sovereigns can not only accuse him via affidavit and witnesses, but also is the only one who can convict him, not the state, not the court, not the judge. There is no judge. It's a magistrate or justice of the peace in a common law court here in our republic. Now, in a court of equity, because it's the interpretation of a trust relationship or a contract, it's left to the sole discretion, conscience, and discretion of a judge. And so in equity, judges are God. Judges are the sole tribunal, and everything's done according to what they think is equitable. And that's why they wanted to pull you into nothing but trust, because they literally become God, right? So if we look, we can go down here to discretion. It's one of my favorite. Where are we at? Discretion, right? No. Discharge, right? It's going to be down here. This is interesting. I love the way that right here, discretion. When it is said that something is left to the discretion of a judge, it signifies that he ought to decide according to the rules of equity and the nature of circumstances. Okay, fair enough, right? The discretion of a judge is said to be the law of tyrants. It is always unknown. It is different in different men. It is casual and depends upon the constitution, temper, and passion. In the best, it is oftentimes capriciousness. In the worst, it is every vice, folly, and passion to which human nature is liable. That's why they wanted you in equity. And when you only have an equitable interest in your own estate and all of your own property, like when you're part of a feudal tenure, paying property taxes on your land or anything like that, or registering your car and all that, you only have an equitable interest in the property, and that can only be adjudicated in equity. So when they summon you to court, they're summoning a person who's dead to the law. That's why they're summoning you, because you have no access to even money, let alone actual property rights. They summon you to court. They're compelling you to answer to the set decay use for your misuse of property. And the set decay use in this instance being the municipal corporation or the corporate state. right, is the one who is administering the property and telling you how it needs to be used, and you pay a fee to use it. And it's just like holding a title under a king. That's what your certificate of title is. It's just evidence that an actual allodial title exists, and this is your certificate of interest in that allodial title. You don't have the allodial title, you have a portion of interest in it. So what do you guys got to add to that? So what's happening here? And you say, well, how can they do this? How can they tell me not to do drugs? Because that body, the body of the United States citizen, is chattel property of the estate under administration. Okay. And you're an infant. You're not able to exercise free will. You're under guardianship or parens patriae, which is government as parent. And as a result, they have to preserve, because it's in the Magna Carta. If you read the Magna Carta, it as part of the law of administration, which is why part of the law of administration is maintaining and preserving the property right here. For so long as a guardian has guardianship of such land, he shall maintain the houses, parks, fish, preserve ponds, mills, and everything else pertaining to it from the revenues of the land itself. When the heir becomes of age, he shall restore the whole land to it. And it also gives them the right to take an administrative fee for administering the property. But the heir never comes of age, never claims the property. So it stays under perpetual administration, which is how this Fiduciary Foundations of Administrative Law paper was written. It's telling you it's perpetual administration of property, right? So because Congress and President acted as jointly as proxy settlers and conveyed your estate into a trust to be used as collateral to secure an international debt security scheme. And that's what's going on. So you are the ultimate collateral for every piece of commercial paper that's issued in this country. It's you. You're the collateral, right? So that's why they need to create what's called an attachment to an account number that's linked to, as El Piro said, your underwriting Social Security investment account. That Social Security investment account is the main surety for all other pieces of debt that are created in this country and treated as currency. What is a traffic ticket? It's a bill of exchange.
Yeah, it's got routing numbers on it. Pure and simple. Those are routing numbers. And what do you use routing numbers for? You use those in all kinds of financial institutions. That's all it is.
Shit like that, yeah. Like a check.
Well, here's where it gets deep too. So you read in the Bible, the New Testament, the scriptures, Jesus flipping over, because the whole Bible is a trust indenture and a book of actual law. People don't realize that. In the New Testament, Jesus is teaching law, like he's teaching. So what happened was, you have the common law. So prior to the administration of property, the only other way that they were able to deviate from common law was by interpreting the law, by claiming some sort of spiritual superiority, right? This is what the two keys and the two pillars and all that represent: temporal and spiritual authority, right? One is physical, one's spiritual, right? The Pope claims to have the keys to both, right? So anyway, by saying I'm the arbiter of what God's will is. And so if you're a Christian nation and your king swears allegiance to me and homage to me and accepts me as a representative of Christ, then I get to create ecclesiastical law, and you have to obey these rules regarding, so not just common law, but also the interpretation of common law. It's the same thing the Pharisees and the Sadducees did in Jesus's time, was they took the actual law, again, the Mosaic law, the common law, and then they're like, oh, but we're spiritually superior to you. We're rabbis, so we're going to interpret it. And that's what the Talmud is. The Talmud is the interpretation of law through the perception and lens of the rabbis, right? So Jesus comes and he says, hey, this is an actual law. You guys are presuming to know, add all this extra stuff, the law, like, and treating it as if it's law and punishing people as if it's law. Well, the Catholic Church does the same thing today, which is no wonder why they say that the Jews created the Catholic Church. The same thing, same exact thing. So when he went into the temple and he flipped over the money changer's table. Well, what is a money changer? Money changer is one who deals with bills of exchange. They exchange foreign currency for domestic currency. That's what a money changer is. And he says, how dare you turn my father's house into a den of thieves? And he flips over the tables, right? And chases the merchants out. Well, these courts are all designed like synagogues, temples, or like churches. That's why they have pews. What they're actually doing is issuing bills of foreign currency, which is, what's the difference between a $100 traffic ticket and a $100 Federal Reserve note? What's the difference? One's domestic currency, one's foreign currency. Well, even both of them are foreign currency, honestly, and they're just two different types of foreign currency. And so what they're doing is they're employing you to exchange them with yourself, to exchange a currency with yourself. So you, the all caps name with the docket number is the constructive pass-through entity, the constructive trust that they create for the purposes of doing this business in this one case. Then you, with the driver's license number attached to the Social Security underwriting investment account, are acting in a different capacity. And what you're essentially doing is one you is working for the court, the other you is acting as an agent for the United States. And because they can't create a debt, one cannot be bound to do it as impossible. There's no money. They can't create a debt. What they're doing is they're exchanging bills and currency. So that traffic ticket is a foreign currency that they want you to exchange Federal Reserve notes for. And that's it. But you secure the whole transaction. So I call it securities farming. That's what they do. Securities farming. They're literally farming you, fleecing you, shearing you.
Yeah, it's done through what's known as slugs, state and local government securities. And that's the local municipal bonding, because you called yourself a resident, somebody, a person born in the United States, but now lives in one of the states of the Union and so has resided.
Exactly. Well, and the funny thing is so you're a foreigner in your own land too, because the United States, so we can look this up, check this out. This is very easy to do. Not only can you look up very easily that the United States is a federal corporation, so what each United States citizen is an enfranchisement. Like you have McDonald's headquarters, and then you have all these franchise McDonald's. Now, headquarters sends the promotional commands out. We're promoting this, put these up in your store, this and that, right? Well, it's the same as United States code. And that's what Congress is doing for all the personnel of the United States. And then the states mirror that under the Buck Act and their revenue codes and their regulation and administration of the property. What is the motor vehicle code? Is nothing but the regulation and administration of property held in trust. Because you don't have the allodial title. And it's funny, Make Stupid People Famous said, how do you get the allodial title? Well, the allodial title of a car is a manufacturer's certificate of ownership. Or if you can get a junk title. But one of my jurists had told me that they've stopped doing that, like at least in Texas. So they're trying to close those loopholes. But it has to be a title where there's no superior interest in it. Okay. Or you could get a declaratory judgment, but we'll explain that another time. It's basically you claim the car, send the claim to the Secretary of State and say, do you have any superior claims? State so within 90 days or whatever. They don't. You take it to a judge and try to get them to declare that the Secretary of State has no interest in your car.
Right. That's the importance of a declaration in equity. A declaration is stating your rights and interests of the property, because that's the definition of property, is technically your rights and interests to the enjoyment of the possession and use of a thing for your own benefit. And when you can state that in equity, there is no actual title. It's just equity says that, yeah, that's right. 9/10 of the law is possession. And as long as you can stand on that, that's what in fact the allodial title is. Anything else would be a legal title as it would be recorded. The allodial title is your absolute title in being able to stand on your word.
Well, so the land patent, like to land to property, real estate, the land patent was the allodial title in our country. And it's because even the concept of the metes and bounds of land and dividing that portion of land from that which is surrounding it is a fiction. So it had to be patented as a creation. It was patented as a creation. We were saying, we're the highest commercial authority in this land, is what the president would say. And he'd say, and I'm stating that these metes and bounds can constitute its own portion of land, sovereign and independent from anything outside of it. And that had to be patented. And so the land patent was the original allodial title. And then the chain of title that took place on the county record would have continued to serve as title in the form of a deed, all the way down until they ended up entering it into registry. Now, remember what registry is. When you register something, you're giving the controlling interest of it over to whomever you're registering it with. So that's what the Doomsday Book was, and that's how they converted common law to feudal law over in England. But we'll look at this. So we go to UCC 9-307, and you go down to section H. Location of debtor, right? This is what it's called. Location of United States. The United States is located in the District of Columbia. So if you're a United States citizen, you're in Virginia or Michigan or New York or anywhere, you're a resident. You're a foreigner engaging in a commercial enterprise on behalf of your home country or corporation. That's what's going on here. That's why they consider everything you do to be engaged in foreign commerce. And they're able to regulate it under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And that's also, and so what that's done is expanded a net of maritime international trade jurisdiction, which allowed them to then, under the Magna Carta, bring in the Lex Mercatoria, or law merchant, right, which is codified as the Uniform Commercial Code. But at the end of the day, the simple fact is it's all just regulation of property presumed to be under administration because no one's claimed it. That's it. No one's claiming. A United States citizen cannot claim anything because they're part of a bankrupt corporation and they're infants who cannot hold title. They're under guardianship. But one of the people of the respective states absolutely can claim it. The 14th Amendment is the crux of this whole thing. This whole scheme it's the 14th Amendment is the biggest problem. And if you were to pull the 14th Amendment out like a Jenga piece, the entire tower would collapse because the 14th Amendment is the collateral. The 14th Amendment citizen is the collateral that the federal corporation uses to appropriate money from the private central banking cartel. I've shown this before, but I'll show it again, actually, because it's funny. Because you're under administration and because your estate has been mortgaged for your benefit, everything has to be for your benefit, including going to jail. That's why they call it corrections. When the post office started using public money, appropriated money, to continue its own existence, it had to change its name from post office when it supported itself to postal service because it has to be a benefit. And this is the creation of the National Space Program. Right? And notice the wording that they have to use at the beginning of each paragraph. The Congress declares that it is the policy of the the Congress declares that the general welfare means welfare, is welfare, benefit, taking care of somebody, welfare, for the general welfare, right? So that's the point of all these philanthropic organizations. The entire nature of this commercial system as it exists right now is philanthropic. And the Catholic Church backs the public charitable trust. They're the one who secures the Social Security account. That's the ultimate security. And that's essentially underwritten by insurance companies that are owned by the Vatican. The Rothschilds are guardians of the papal treasure. I wonder if I can pull that up, actually. And oh yeah, so as far as this is concerned, every single paragraph starts with for the general welfare, every new section anyway. So look, so the Congress declares that the general welfare, right? Congress declares that the general welfare, because it has to be welfare for them to create it. But what did they actually use the space agencies for? To take that public money, which is not money, but debt based on your sweat equity and revenue collected from your property. They took that, created these space agencies, and then they funneled this public money for your general welfare right into all these intelligence agencies, black budget projects, and God knows what else. Their own pockets, definitely. But it had to be for your welfare. And that's part of the purpose of the heliocentric lie. Not only to make you not realize that common law is the only law, which you have to have a relationship with God to know that. And it is a fact. And it's held, even Blackstone, every major jurist, everyone who actually really knows the law knows this. And I'm talking about on their side too, right? Absolutely knows this. But if you believe there is no God, how could you ever conceive of a common law? Who gives people the authority? What's the origin of common law? There's no God, right? We evolved from monkeys, and there is no authority higher than the state. There is no authority higher than the state, right? And that's what they have to have you believe. But what was I going to look up just now? I was talking about, damn, forgot now. I was going to look up something good though. What was it? It was something I haven't looked up in a long time. It might come back to me, whatever. But yeah, that's the origin. So all other law comes from the administration of property presumed to be under administration. If you're not under that, then you're just under common law, you know? So we can see Chisholm. See if this comes up. Chisholm v. Georgia. Yeah, it's funny because case text they shut down.
What?
Yeah, did you know that? I'm not really sure why. Chisholm v. Georgia. Let's see if we can find a good copy of this. That's actually case briefs, federal. Sure, this might work. Oh yeah, no, it's gonna be written in. Anyways, it says at the Revolution, sovereignty devolved upon the people, and I do have this case. I have it printed too. Sovereignty devolved upon the people, and they truly are the sovereigns of this country, but they are sovereigns without subjects. They're co-tenants in sovereignty and have none to govern but themselves. And the government's relationship to the people is the same as a feudal lord or vassal is to the king. So the government is literally our servant. The government could never claim authority over you, which is why it takes an affidavit by a living man or woman that is one of your peers, meaning sovereignty, because that's what peer actually means. When they look up the genealogy of royal families, they use Burke's peerage because the word peer means sovereign. Doesn't mean equal, it means sovereign. Now it's equal if you're both sovereign, right? But it's a sovereignty, and it takes a jury of your peers to convict you. The state cannot obtain jurisdiction over you unless you contract with it, or unless there's some sort of presumption that places you under its administration as an incompetent. And that's what they're doing here. So, let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to go through? Okay, so actually, let me reshare this screen. There's a couple things I wanted to go over these videos and see what you guys think. Let's see. Gotta go to Facebook. The reason I'm doing that is because I message it to myself instead of having to scroll through all the damn bookmarks. It's kind of a pain in the ass. So, first of all, check this out. Okay, this isn't going to work because it opened a new screen. So, let me share the actual individual screen. There we go.
Slaves in America, and nobody talks about it. They were ripped from their homes in Ireland, chained animals, and sold for less than African slaves. In the 1600s, they were called white cargo. Over 300,000 shipped off to the Caribbean and American colonies. They worked brutal sugar plantations under a sun that didn't care what color their skin was. Many died from disease, beatings, and starvation. Their graves, unmarked. Their names, forgotten. Some were crammed into coffin ships, packed below deck like freight, never to return. Even the word redneck, it comes from the Irish, burned raw in the Caribbean heat. But while others were freed, remembered, or repaid, the Irish got nothing. History was rewritten. They were renamed indentured servants, just to silence the truth. No reparations, no monuments, no place in the classroom, because pain has no color and truth has no sign.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing. They're all talking about these reparations and stuff right now. What about the Irish?
Yeah, look into the draft riots of 1863 in New York City.
Yeah, the Irish rioting for the gangs. Yeah, oh yeah.
That was, yeah, they had that in gangs in New York, but that really happened. That was, and what they would do is they was waiting for these Irish at the docks, these recruiters. And they'd promise them the moon, we'll give you so many acres of land and a mule. All you got to do is serve 18 months with this regiment. You'll be with other Irish, your people that you came here with and everything. And it sounded very appealing. But they used them to get the Confederacy to use up their ammunition. They just sent wave upon wave into deadly fire before they sent in the the other troops, because they're like, look at Fredericksburg. Oh my God, that was terrible. Burnside Bridge, the same thing. They just sent wave after wave. And the irony at Fredericksburg, the Confederates were entrenched behind a stone wall. And they sent wave upon wave of these Irish immigrant soldiers at the Confederate wall, and they just mowed them down. There's no way they could get at them. And it got so bad that another Irishman on the Confederate side, Sergeant Kirkland, he waved a flag of truce to be able to get out onto where all these dying men were at, to give them aid and give them some water. And then, nobody fired. And then he came back over the wall and the battle began once again. And the irony of it was that very field, that cornfield there that these guys were mowed down and killed in, was the very field that supplied the food for relief for the famine that was taking place in Ireland. So the very thing that sustained them to allow them to get here to America is the place where they died. It's pretty fucked up.
That is fucked up. Well, one of the reasons I showed that particular video is because what is a civil, and why do they not bring up the Irish indenture? Well, I'll explain why, because it's much easier to divide people on race than nationality, right? So they would rather lump Irish in with, the rest of the Europeans. So what is the purpose of that? Well, the main tenet of communism, or these membership corporations, is simply this: to be disenfranchised is to have your capacity for rights taken away from you. Okay, that's called disenfranchisement. When you have a disenfranchised group, the key to control, societal control, is this: to enfranchise those minority groups. Okay, you want to enfranchise them because now they come under your administration, your guardianship, and you give them privileges and immunities. Now, for everyone under your guardianship, those privileges and immunities are called civil rights. You can call them, even though they're not actually rights, they're privileges and immunities, but you can call them civil rights, and that allows you to equitably enforce equality through the administration of those people's estates, their behavior. You tell them, oh, you can say this, you can't say that, you can do this, you can't do that. Oh, these poor marginalized people, right? Yeah. Now, the 14th Amendment enfranchises everyone. Okay, so we're all, well, not me, I filed my paperwork, but anybody who's under the administration of the federal corporation is part of that enfranchisement. Okay, so they have administrative control of your estate, and they're going to use these marginalized groups, whether it be the gays, the trannies, the blacks, the illegal immigrants, whoever it might be, right, that they have administrative control over. They're going to use these marginalized groups to take from you, using their administrative control over your estate, to take from you either some of your individual liberties in the form of like freedom of expression, or they're going to take your personal property, such as your money or whatever else, taxing your property, to give to these quote unquote disenfranchised people. It's one of the main pillars and tenets of communism. And for that purpose, because it allows you to take, if everyone's enfranchised, meaning they've come under you for privileges and immunities, then you can take from the majority to give to the minority. And it allows you to legislate equality, which can never actually be legislated because no one has equal capacity. You should only have equal opportunity, not capacity, right? You can't, if you look at nature, and again, this is observing the law of nature, nature's God. If you see a lion, if you see a lame gazelle in the savannah, right, handicapped gazelle, right, is the lion going to pass up that handicapped gazelle because it wouldn't be fair to take out the handicapped gazelle? Right, that would be bigoted and discriminatory because the gazelle is handicapped. No, he's going to eat the shit out of that gazelle, right? So you can't legislate equality. You can only in law, by its own very nature and existence, is equal opportunity, Everyone is equal before the law, but you can't make somebody of equal capacity. That's the point of disenfranchisement. And that's one of the major reasons they never bring up the Irish indentured, because they want everybody to think the Civil War is about slavery, not conquering state sovereignty. And they want the 14th Amendment only stands because of the disenfranchisement of blacks. And the blacks were only disenfranchised because they were dependent and they were just formerly property, chattel, right? Even Andrew Johnson said in time, the blacks could learn to be free. The avenues of freedom have only now been opened up to them. And once they learn how to take care of themselves and live on their own estates, then they'll enjoy the same rights that every other inhabitant of this land enjoys, right? So there's this in the Wisconsin Constitution. I'm going to show a couple more videos, but this in the Wisconsin Constitution, the 1848, is pretty interesting. Where are we at? Right here. No person, or where is it at? All lands within the state are declared to be allodial. It shows you that all lands are allodial. Now, this is the other interesting thing. No distinction shall ever be made by law between resident aliens and citizens in reference to the possession or enjoyment or descent of property. So what does that mean? That means the people created the states. They also created the role of state citizen, which is a fiction, a persona they could adopt, but they still exist outside and above that creation that they made. Now, even if somebody chose not to participate in the state citizenry, didn't want to ever hold office or any of those things, they still had their common law property rights as either an inhabitant or a resident alien. Didn't matter. It's important. It's important.
Right. A man is not subject to the written law of that which came before him simply because he was born within it. He still has that freedom of choice. And in that freedom of choice, he can exist within that law if he has good comprehension of it and knows how it works. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, and that's the whole point, because there is only one law, and government doesn't create it, and government doesn't give you your rights. Those are privileges if government gives them to you. God grants you your rights. That's the only, and that's common law. And everyone knew this up until Rockefeller took control of the education system. So now I want your guys' opinion on this real quick. Oh, hold on. Because there's immediately when I see stuff like this, and that's the big difference in perception when you like really understand how the law works and stuff. And I'm curious how you guys perceive this, but I'm going to express my immediate thoughts after I see what you guys say.
Get ready to file this one under, I can believe it, but it's the sickest thing I've ever heard. United Healthcare fell 6% today on the stock market after news broke that they were secretly paying nursing homes to reduce hospital transfer rates. You know what that means? That means when your grandma in the nursing home is sick enough to need to go to the hospital, these nursing homes were taking kickbacks secretly from an insurance company to prevent grandma from going to the hospital. So what was the end result of that?
So look how indignant and angry he is about that. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
Well,
Sounds like probably
it does. It does, man.
It what?
the depopulation agenda.
That,
yeah.
Immediately what I'm thinking is this is a product of the Rockefeller controlled education system, where why the fuck is your grandma in a nursing home?
Bingo.
Right.
Why are you dependent on a corporation to take care of your blood, your family? That's your own damn fault.
That's what I point out to my companion. You know, her mom passed away in a nursing home because her family was so loving that they put her in a nursing home rather than take care of her. And I try to explain to her, you know, she's 68 and she's disabled and retired both. And she wants so much to be part of that family, but I have to try to explain to her and show her how they don't really care about her.
No, she's just a dollar sign. Yeah.
They want her in a nursing home.
We'll see. And that's all these institutions of municipal services and healthcare services and all that stuff. These were created to give you the illusion, to make you a worker, to make you a battery for the system. First of all, people don't realize that your house is supposed to remain in your house and on your estate, on the estate of your house, and that the family's supposed to work together. You're supposed to have like a family business or a family farm, and then when you get older and you're of the age of what they call retire, which is an insult in itself, then you hand the business down to your son or your son-in-law, if you have a daughter, or your daughter, whoever, you hand it down to them, and you still live on the estate and finish out the rest of your days in an advisory capacity. And you never ever go to the state or any kind of municipal corporate, benefit or healthcare system setup because he's so mad. Look how indignant he is.
Huh? What's the end result? Is grandma still, how many, now we need to find out how many people passed away because they didn't get hospital transfers.
Yeah, see, and that's the whole thing. And that whole nursing home situation subsidized by the money they appropriate against your sweat equity, because your infants, and you do shit like this where you send your parents or your grandparents to go finish out their days in some corporate run facility. Right. So it's not supposed to be this way. And they had to, that's why all the way up until the public education system was created, the use of seals. Every house had a seal. I have a seal, right? Every house had a seal, and the seal authenticated any of your deeds, anything you actually done. Nothing could be said to be done if it didn't accompany your seal. And this goes all the way back to ancient times. And if we still use the seal, we didn't forget the knowledge of the seal, then none of this trust indenture system could be created, because none of those initial contracts that place you under 14th Amendment citizenship. First of all, if you knew about seals, nobody would have entered that contract in the first place. That's the big difference in the understanding of law and money and stuff like that. So what do you think about that, Dad?
I got a mouthful of cookies. Go on without me for a minute. I'm trying to chew cookies.
Well, part of the job of the education system, at the same time as sensitizing people, it's also desensitizing. In other words, it sensitizes them to pay attention and observe, like I said earlier, what's in the box, the chaos that they present. So they pay attention to the chaos rather than thinking abstractly outside of the box with that critical thinking to observe what else there is, to open up those doors of opportunity and different multiple choices that they know are there, but they're afraid. They've been indoctrinated into this fear, as well as this popularity contest,
where they need their securities, right? They need that's the social nets, the welfare social nets. They're so conditioned to need them that they could never imagine a life without them, without Social Security, without Medicaid, without all those. And those are the very implements of those are the very instruments of your enslavement, without a doubt. So I'm going to play.
Well, look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that the amount of money that you've put into Social Security throughout your life, you're never going to see that, because you're not going to live long enough by the time they start dishing it out to you. But what if a person took whatever they take out of your paycheck every week? You say, I don't want that. I'm not going to ever collect Social Security. Get the fuck away from me with that. I'm going to take that money myself, and I'm going to put it in a savings account, just a simple savings account. You would be so much further ahead at 60 years old, even before then, than you would be by the time, oh, goody, I get Social Security. I got to beg them for a certain amount of money. Fuck that.
That's part of what makes people infants. That's why they look, because you would know that. See, when you agree to this, when you sign up for Social Security, that was the very first welfare benefit that they offered under the United States citizenship to justify the mortgage of your estate and the appropriation of funds against your sweat equity was the Social Security underwriting investment account. They had to have money to pay for it, right? They had to have money. And when you think about this, each dollar, each note is, because they're not dollars, each note is an obligation of the United States to pay at some future date. The more currency that is generated by these corporations growing, these corporate workhouses growing and becoming profitable, require more currency to be generated, which places you by proxy and the federal corporation deeper into debt. The existence of these corporate workhouses is antithetical to the debt. It's like a self-fulfilling cycle, but that they're self-perpetuating, but that initial Social Security is a benefit. And what you're saying by collecting that Social Security is you're saying, or by signing up for it, is saying, I don't know how to plan for my retirement, or I have no idea anything about estate planning. So I need you to make sure that when I'm old, I don't end up, on the streets or whatever. I need this social benefit of you saving my money and using it and investing it and planning, and doing all these. That's all 401k is too. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And it's an admission of infancy and incompetence. That's what it is. So it's the very first one of all of them, actually. So Illuminati confirmed, 33 people watching. Check this out.
As we all know, that our U.S. tax system is a voluntary tax system, and we depend on people willing every year to sit down, fill out that form, and pay their appropriate amount of taxes. So I really think enforcement is a reward to those who voluntarily comply. And I think if the public does not see that the IRS is enforcing the laws, we're going to be at risk of losing people continuing to voluntarily comply.
It's time to awaken your divine potential with secretcivics.com, where you'll learn.
That is the truth. So it is voluntary. It says right in the code that it's voluntary. So what is an income tax? The income tax was first introduced by the Corporate Income Tax Act of 1909 and then ratified into the Constitution with the 16th Amendment, which did not give Congress any additional taxing powers. What is an income tax? It is if property is the ultimate realization of your will, and you acquire property by labor, then before even acquiring property, the right to labor towards property, they're claiming an interest in. A superior interest in your right to labor towards property. So before you even acquire property, they're taxing your labor, which is fucking insane, right? So how do they do that? Well, the way they do that is because you are not a living man or woman. You are chattel property of the estate, and the estate is under administration. They're letting you use the estate. They're just letting you use the estate. And so for the use of the estate, it's considered in the same vein as a corporate profit. Any money you make from the use of any of the property of that estate, including your body, is considered in the same vein as profits, income of a corporation, right? So look here, right here, and it tells you that a person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, a trust, an estate, a partnership, an association, a company, or a corporation. It's this one right here that they consider you an estate. Well, they consider you the trustee, right, of an estate. And for some purposes, when they're dealing with your Social Security number generating securities, they consider you a trust. That specifically is the trust that you are a trustee of, is the Social Security trust. That is why all of your real and personal property, that is significant real and personal property, must be linked to your Social Security number.
And this is controlled by the Health and Human Services Estate Recovery Program, because it's the Bureau of Vital Statistics through the Health Department at birth that creates all this stuff and monetizes it. It's
public health and welfare. You're right. It's public health and welfare is how they appropriate money for everything. You'll look at what's in Title 42, and because everything has to be for your health or welfare, it has to be for your benefit. It's everything. Civil Rights Commission, civil rights, religious freedom. Like, what does that have to do with health and welfare, right? Religious freedom. But when you understand what those words actually mean, it makes sense. This is where the Space Administration is under, the National Housing Partnerships, Intergovernmental Cooperation, which was repealed, sure, Environmental Quality Improvement. So that's the whole big idea with the scam of climate change, is right for your benefit and in order to, and welfare, and in order to protect you from yourself because you're an infant and do not know any better. We have to introduce a state of emergency under the World Health Organization, United Nations, saying that we're in a climate change crisis And so that will give us greater latitude in the regulation of the use of property. No more driving gas-powered vehicles, no more use of gas stoves, no more going into our natural resources and foraging or doing whatever, hunting. All these things they can regulate now in a state of emergency for your benefit. That's the point of it. What they want to do, because right now what you can do is you can renounce that 14th Amendment citizenship. That's what I teach people to do. I'm sure El Piro teaches people to do that. We have in the Juris Society, that's what we do, is we put on the record, we rebut all presumptions, reclaim our estate, and create a performance contract that's vicious, right? And then create a private express trust. You create your own corporate entity that's protected by Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. And Article 1, Section 10 that says no state shall make or pass any law ex post facto impairing the obligation of contracts. Well, that trust, that private express trust you create, is not a statutory or public trust. It's a private trust that you don't need government permission. You put all your property in it, right? And so an example of how this works is say like, okay, so motor vehicle and all that is commercial purposes, right? So everything's done under the pretense that you are a foreigner engaged in commercial enterprise, right? So on behalf of a foreign corporation. So when we go to Title 18, Section 31, we go down to motor vehicle, we see that motor vehicle means every description of carriage or other contrivance propelled or drawn by mechanical power and used for commercial purposes. So not or use or can be used. In order to be a motor vehicle, it must be used for commercial purposes. So if you take your car and you place it in a trust, say you get a junk title, or you're able to get the MCO or something like that, you place it in a trust. And that private express trust that you just write up and you say, the use in using this property and using this automobile, under no circumstances is it ever to be used for commercial purposes whatsoever. Okay, you are bound to not use that car for commercial purposes at all. So then the enforcement of registration or presenting a license while using, traveling in it or any of that stuff would be compelling you to violate your obligation to a common law contract, which is they can't do. It's protected by Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. They can't do it. Because your private law, that common law contract, supersedes, because to follow their statute or code would impair the performance of a contract, right? It's null and void. And the Supreme Court's upheld this many, many times. There's a great book called The Concise Trustee Handbook it's called Weiss Concise Trustee Handbook. And it's fantastic. And he's got all the Supreme Court cases. And that guy wrote that book because he was hired to fight people like us that know the law. These corporations would hire him and be like, hey, this guy's really fucking us up. We need your help. And so he wrote this book and said, of all the times that I've had to fight these people, if they would have just done this and put their property in a private express trust, then there's nothing I could have done. And that's what that whole book's about. And it's an amazing book. And my point in saying this is that's why they want to digitalize everything and place it under artificial intelligence. Because once they can digitalize your identity and currency, right, and then implant that in your body, there is no ability to renounce that legal entity identification anymore. That legal entity identification becomes one with you, and you will always be that. And so now you're in a corporate fiction in the world of the dead, in the world of sin, the world of pretend, right, under the fucking serpents of Cain. And that's just, and that's why and so if they can automate everything like they do in China, right, where they have your bank accounts hooked up to one app, that's your social media, everything's all hooked up to the WeChat app, right? And if you jaywalk, artificial intelligence is monitoring all of the cameras, and there is no trial, there is no administrative hearing regarding the regulation of the use of property, none of that stuff. The AI just goes, jaywalking is against this code. This person has been confirmed jaywalk, deduct this from their account. It's permanent enslavement without any kind of due process. That's what they want to set up. And make no mistake, that's exactly what they still want to set up here. All those, Middle Eastern countries that were just investing trillions of dollars into our economy, what do you think they were investing in? AI energy infrastructure. That's literally what you can look it up. That's what Donald Trump said they were into, AI energy infrastructure. Now, what people fail to realize is that we are the main source of energy. Beyond oil, beyond anything else, the main resource, the main energy resource in the United States corporation is the human resource.
Yeah, there's not one gross domestic product that exists without it.
That's exactly right. So what they've done is, like I was saying earlier, every corporation is actually just part of one big corporation, that is the United States corporation, all hooked up to the trust indenture and the Social Security underwriting investment account, right? What they've done is they've managed, and that's actually what this entire the book I started, or the paper that I started this whole stream on, this right, or no, not sorry, not this. Where is this one? This entire paper right here is about collectivizing, about creating a state of interdependence and infancy, essentially placing all property under administration by controlling the education system and making sure people don't learn about law, history, or money, which all three are intertwined, right? Intimately intertwined. One doesn't exist without the other. The history of an area is determined by the law, and the law of that area is determined by the money and property usage of that area. So they're all three intertwined. And by creating this interdependent society under administration, they were able to collectivize the productive value of the entire republic into one big corporation that they can now wield like a club against other nations. Right? Biggest consumer market, most powerful military, and it's all collective and under administration. You're an employee of a corporation. And that's now all that exists. There is no constitutional republic. It's just a corporation, one big corporation. And what they want to do is place this one big corporation under the administrative control of artificial intelligence. And that's why they're starting to implement smart manufacturing. 2022, the state of U.S. manufacturing was established in Michigan by the World Economic Forum. And that state of U.S. manufacturing is for the entire country of basically modernizing and technologically advancing the manufacturing processes using smart technology, replacing whatever can be replaced by robots, and then placing everyone under the productive management of artificial intelligence, where it will literally, I've worked on these camera systems. I know how they work. They not only do all these new camera systems have facial recognition, but they literally monitor the productivity of the employees that are on the camera. So like say in the restaurants, I hooked them up, they're monitoring the servers and marking noting how long it takes that server to wait on these tables and get back and where that server can improve, and whatever sort of disciplinary measures or modifications need to be made regarding that server. And all this is being sent back to a big data warehouse. And this data warehouse is also controlled by AI. It's just going to be one big technocratic corporation where you have no property rights if you people don't wake up. That's why I do these shows. If you people don't wake up, we're going to live in a big technocratic corporation where no one has property rights, and everything is under the administration of artificial intelligence that we don't get to program. We don't get to tell about, well, I didn't actually ever lawfully enter into this arrangement or contract. I've rebutted this presumption. This is how law actually works. AI don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? And that's what this is their final solution, really. It's their final chess move.
Yeah. And if people don't understand, like you were mentioning earlier, that in personam mask, see, people don't understand that part of their life. And I think it's imperative to the aspect that most people don't even understand. There's a distinct difference between the word people and the term person. And they will go around their entire lives professing to be that person. It's founded in personam, which is the identity.
It's the role that somebody else writes for you. So that's why I try to explain. All governments are trusts. All corporations are trusts. Society is a series of trust relationships built on top of each other via compact and presumption, right? And all of this originates in the original jurisdiction of common law. All the original contracts and arrangements must be entered into from common law because that's the only law, right? But once you get into this trust arrangement, now you've adopted, and under common law, you are a real man or woman. Once you become part of the trust, you are now a person, your persona. And so, like with the state citizen, we created that trust. We wrote that script. The state citizen is something we created. So you didn't have to be a state citizen, but even if you wanted to be a state citizen, you were still sovereign above the government, which ordinarily sovereign citizen is an oxymoron. Yes, but when you understand the nature of trust relationships, what a grantor is, and the position that the state citizen held in relation to the government of that state, right? Because the state wasn't the government anyways. People think that now the state is the government. The state has never been the government. The state is the people. Then you have a government of that state. Okay, now the state is the government, the corporate state, because everything's one big corporate trust relationship. So when you enter into a trust, now the 14th Amendment citizen is a role that the federal corporation scripted. They created that persona, right? They created that persona. And when you agree to adopt that persona, you have to enact and play out the story that they've written for you. And that's why everyone's acting. You're acting secretary, acting, governor, acting whatever. Everyone's acting because it's all a bunch of roles. And these trusts are literally scripts. And that's why it says right on our dollar bill or right on the Federal Reserve note, "In God we trust." That's the type of trust they're talking about. They're talking about your free will consent created this arrangement and God honors it. God won't step in and intercede unless you learn how to prove the fraud. Unless you properly renounce your position as that person in that script that you didn't write. Right? Because that's what it is. And if you look at how society is just a series of trust relationships, I can explain the origin of a municipal charter township or municipal corporation all the way to the creation of a state. You got a collection of landholders, freeholders. They get together and say, hey, all of our lands touch each other. Why don't we get together, buy out anybody that doesn't want to be a part of this, get together and create a municipal corporation. We'll use our land for this corporation. And then we'll incorporate ourselves as commissioners or a board of trustees or whatever you want to be called, right? And then anyone who comes to live, then we'll create multi-family housing units on our land and allow people to come and engage in a society and build a society on our land. But then we'll be able to create the regulatory rules called ordinances, statutes, ordinances, and codes regarding their conduct and behavior while on our property, that municipal corporation's property. Now, with that being said, unless somebody agrees to be subject to those things by living there as one of the citizens of that township or whatever you want to call it, adopting that trust relationship persona, where they're now a trustee, get to use the property belonging to these owners of the municipal corporation, then if you're just passing through, in order for their ordinances to apply to you, they must be in conformity with law. What does that mean? That means like, hey, don't be out after 7 o'clock and you're just walking through the town or whatever, and you don't actually live there. Well, that's not in accordance with law. You can be like, I'm just passing through. I don't live here. I'm not under contract with you. That doesn't take on the color of law with me. Now, if you're walking through that municipal corporation, right, that township, and I have a code or a statute that says do not murder anyone and prescribe penalties for the murder. Well, now, even without being under a trust relationship with me, you're still subject to that statute because that statute conforms to the law. So now take it up a degree higher, and these municipal corporations decide to band together and create what's called a county. And then that county incorporates and creates a board of trustees or commissioners, right, overseers of some sort, made up of the freeholders of that county. Right. And then the municipal corporations come to a certain degree under that county corporation. Then the counties get together and say, hey, we're going to be called a state. And this will be our national boundaries. And we're going to establish a governor, a treasurer, and a secretary. Right. And we're only going to allow the freeholders to vote for who runs this, because as far as everyone else is concerned, they're just tenants, serfs, paupers, and not actual property owners. So they don't have actual common law right to any of this land. That's how that works. Right? So I don't know. I mean, that's the best way I can figure to explain it. What do you think of that?
Pretty trippy, man. Who did we lose? We lost
El
Piro.
Yeah.
Did you check that super chat you got?
I got a super chat. No, I did
Yeah,
not.
there was a super chat that was basically telling me that good job handling that fake dude over on Flatzoids today. This dude, he come on there saying he used to be a flat earther, now he's a glober. I said, no, you weren't. Shut the fuck
Why
up.
didn't that show? Oh, LJ. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
LJ.
Thanks, LJ. I didn't even know that there was a fake flat earther on Flatzoid or Reality as it is now, right?
What a joke that guy was, man.
What happened?
Yeah, he's sitting there talking about. He says, "Oh no, they do. They cross Antarctica all the time." And I'm like, "No, they don't fucking cross Antarctica. One, they're not allowed to. First off. Second is that you're looking at something that's going over the edge of Antarctica. Okay, so that's not crossing Antarctica. It's crossing the edge." Which either way, if you look at it on an AE map, it's like you already know what they're doing. They're catching the fucking trade winds and the jet stream. It's these people. For somebody to even suggest that I was once a flat earther for many years, but after the final experiment, now I'm a glober. Fuck you. Shut up.
There we go. It wouldn't even let me share that comment at first, and it didn't actually show the comment, at least not on my live stream chat. So
it was over there. It was starred. It's
yeah,
starred.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Yep. So I got that. Thank you, LJ. Much appreciated, man. I guess should I send it to you? I guess.
No.
I just but
get Lexi a fucking ice cream or something, man.
Right on. Yeah. So, but that's the that's the crux of the whole situation. It's funny. The last thing I'm going to say about this before I shut it down, because I got to go to work soon, but is basically what you realize. So if you ever want to learn the history of a period, an epoch, right, or epoch of time, however you want to pronounce that, if you ever want to learn the history, you have to look at the law, and the law will be determined by the economic system of that area. The economic system always determines the law. People have lawful money and allodial titles, and it's common law with equity as a sister jurisdiction to supply for the deficiency and the enforcement of contracts that common law can't recognize, not looking at, because common law doesn't recognize fictions and trust relationships, right? So you'd be under common law. And if the government claims to be the daddy, or the Caesar claims to be the daddy, or it's a militarily conquered territory or whatever, then it's going to be some form of absolute property control by a centralized authority, which is what Roman civil law essentially is, right? Regulation of the use of property under control of the state. For whatever reason, however it ended up in that situation, whether the people depend entirely on the state for their survival, which would immediately make the state the supreme property holder, because independence is the only way to be free, right? Declaration of Independence. Right. So if you want to know the history of a period of time, then look at the law and the system of economy around that time. Now, I want to say this, and I know that Flatzoid would greatly disagree, and I don't know one way or the other, but the more I study law and the history of law, the more I become increasingly convinced that not only is society as we understand it today a brand new invention of this mass collective administration of property called democracy, socialism, and communism, three branches of the same tree. It's brand new. Okay, well, I take that back. It came from ancient Greece, which even they hated democracy, and they'd have like 1,000-man juries because they said no man was rich enough to bribe 1,000 men. They understood the inherent flaws of democracy, which is why we were never a democracy. So if you look at England and you try to study the law of England from the time of Christ, shortly after the time of Christ, when the first church was established in England in like 46 AD, all the way to William the Conqueror, you can hardly find anything about the law, because the law literally was not written down for pretty much 1,000 years. It was not written down. Nobody wrote down the law, right? So you had like codes regulating or statutes regulating commerce and stuff like that. But as far as regarding people, the behavior of people and the use of their property and all that stuff, nothing was written. Then after 1,000 years, coincidentally, right, feudalism gets introduced, and it has to start in common law. And then you have the church comes in, right, under, it's basically rebranded Rome, and they're claiming divine authority, right to rule, basically by acting as the vicar of Christ and creating ecclesiastical jurisdictions, claiming that if you're a Christian, you must adhere to this. And then, of course, you had to be initiated into that system via baptism and all that stuff. So you literally took an initiatory entrance into this organization that then gained administrative control over you. But still, it required your consent, right? So what I'm trying to get at is there seems to be about 1,000-year period of time where people just followed the actual law. And there wasn't like mass control of other men, at least in the Western world. Right. And then it's almost like the gates were opened and the devil was loosed. And then you had these systems of taking administrative control of property to regulate the behavior of people. And now for the last 1,000 years, that's been developing. So we get to where we are today. Right. So what does that mean? Like, does that give credence to the little season idea? I don't know. I generally only try to talk about things I can prove. I can't prove that, but it is an interesting thing to think about when for pretty much 1,000 years, like right about the time that the revelation of John, shortly after the revelation of John, when he said those events would take place, right, and that Christ would come back and establish a millennial reign, there does seem to have been some kind of utopian reign where people just followed the law and there was very little need for government. What do you think of that, Dad?
Hang on, I'm getting coffee.
What do you think of that, Mojo?
I had to go pee, man.
I think it's the way it should be. It's like it almost sounds like a utopia.
But I'm saying, look at the, like, follow what I'm following. If you want to learn the truth about an area in history or an era in history, look at the law and the money, right? And for like 1,000 years, from right around the time when, if you took Revelation seriously, that Jesus would have returned, for 1,000 years, law wasn't written because it was unspoken and it was just followed for 1,000 years. Right? Could that have been the Tartarian Empire? Could that have been what they've been seeking to bury and conquer? You know what I mean? And to place under draconian control through fear? Because that's all welfare. Welfare is just an answer to fear, which is reptilian.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's how they take administrative control of everybody, as I prove all the time. And so you could say that's absolutely a tool of the devil. Government in general is the devil, but for about 1,000 years, you have a period of time where it seems as if there was very little need for government intervention in people's lives. But we don't really know because nothing's really written regarding the law of that period and in the British Isles. Right. So, I mean, I'm just saying it could have possibly, you know, what else can you call it where it's like law doesn't need to be written down because it's quite simply this: don't violate anyone else's free will. As long as your free will isn't violating yours. You don't need to write it down. And descent of property goes to the most immediate, you know, blood next of kin. That sounds
kind of
pretty
like having a law that's, you know, don't be a dick. There you go.
Pretty much. So very little need for government intervention in people's lives, right? So I could match. And then William the Conqueror is literally the devil in the guise of the church coming over to introduce administrative control of lands and properties through fear of invasion. That's what happened. So, just a thought. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm sure I noticed touching on religious subjects. That's what I'm saying. Make stupid people famous. It said, yeah, it makes me wonder if it is, right? It's quite interesting. So, but I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. And I do know that when you start talking about this type of stuff, people get real touchy. Everybody's got their own like hardcore convictions, and the way God made the world and what the Bible means, which is amazing to me that you got people that are so willing to argue with you about it, but as if they know so well, like who actually honestly knows? Nobody, right? But you can know the law, and you can know the history of the law, and that points you in the right direction regarding from ancient to modern times, what has been understood about the law. So the Peaceful Penguin showed up right at pretty much the end of our stream here. So, but whoa, this is interesting. Hey, in the private chat, Alpero left us a link to investigate. Said it'll take some time to go. But all right, well, I'm going to shut this down, guys. Is there anything you guys want to add to the discussion? The control of education, anything?
No,
You covered
I'm
it
pretty
well.
much I'm going to kick back and relax here for the rest of the night. That's what I'm going to do.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys for joining me. When are you going to be streaming next? I'll let everybody know if you know.
Let's see, what's today? Tuesday? Probably, or today's Wednesday, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. See, the fucking holiday always screws me up. So it's Wednesday. Probably either tomorrow or Friday.
All right. Well, if you're not subscribed to Sovereign Soul and Chain Mind, please do. They'll be streaming either tomorrow or Friday, where he pretty much talks about a little bit of everything regarding the prison with invisible bars in which we live. So, and Mojo, of course, thanks for joining me. I will be doing another stream probably Saturday afternoon. And then, of course, we have our Juris Society meeting on Sunday, which I've actually got some pretty good information for that as well that I just recently come across. It's entirely regarding seals and why they're so important. And I'm sure you guys will appreciate it. I've been looking very hard for the history of seals, and I finally found a comprehensive document. Explains it pretty well. So, but all right, guys, thank you for joining me, and I will see you this weekend.
Peace out.
Night.